School is in session and so are state lawmakers. This legislative session, educators tell me when the final bell rings, a win for public education would mean updated funding, stronger worker protections, and policies that support both students and the educators who lead the class.
This is just raising a concept, so there's no draft language yet, but the governor's bill is free breakfast for all students, and then the reduced eligible students will have free lunch, but it is not free lunch for all students.
There's a lot of discussion about cell phone free schools and what that could look like in a bell to bell ban. What we're really asking for is the legislature to impose the ban, but allow the districts and the municipalities to have the conversations, invite parents in to talk about what implementing that looks like. Whether it be in workers' compensation, whether it be with FOI protection, or whether it is through our termination practices. I think everyone agrees that our ECS formula is kind of stuck in time. And while it's, fully funded, it's not fully funded in 2026 dollars. But I think in the short term, there seems to be some building consensus around fixing the foundation grant, which is the real primary issue that is stuck in 2013 dollars and hasn't been adjusted for inflation.
Another major point of discussion this legislative session centers around high-stakes testing. Diaz tells me decades of evidence shows it hasn't moved the needle when it comes to student performance, but it has increased pressure inside schools. She tells me teachers are often driven by deadlines and testing demands instead of navigating the instructional road with students. In studio, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61.
According to this memo, by 2029, 12 graduate assistant positions are expected to be cut in just one department. And to be eligible for help from graduate assistants, large classes must have at least 120 students enrolled, and that one GA would have only 5 hours to help per course.
Professors we spoke with now worry that the quality of education could decline as larger class sizes become likely, which they say could cause morale to go down.
I think if the university is asking instructors and professors to teach the same way in the classroom with fewer resources and with less support, they're living in a fantasy world.
And I really worry that that is what students will hear when they hear about these cuts, that they will hear that the administration is perfectly fine with UConn becoming a degree mill.
Jeremy Pressman, a political science professor at UConn Storrs campus, along with Sam Summers, an assistant professor in residence at the university's Waterbury campus, share similar worries, even though they serve students at two separate locations. As current union members, these budget cuts came as a shock, so both professors agreed to sit down exclusively with Fox 61 to lay out their concerns, which fall into three main categories. The first is quality of instruction.
Well, I teach a large introductory class with 200 students. Under some of the proposals that have been put forward by the university administration, I would in the future have about a quarter of the support that I have now from graduate students. And it's just a math equation, right? I can't make more hours in the day. And so with less support like that, it means less interaction.
It's a concern not only shared by instructors, but also current students in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences like sophomore Trinity Wynn.
With my courses, I utilize as many resources as I can, specifically like supplemental instruction, also like teaching assistants. And I feel like having those resources available is really important.
The second concern, class size.
There's not as much one-to-one contact or small group contact for students, the kind of things that students really remember that can lead to great mentoring relationships.
The third concern, morale.
I'm worried about faculty stress and burnout and how that filters down to students.
It's definitely disappointing. Accessibility is really important.
Fox 61 made multiple offers to UConn administration to go on camera, and while UConn did not agree for a sit-down interview, they did answer our questions through email. A university spokesperson says, quote, UConn is examining and adjusting its budget allocations across the institution to accommodate reductions in state revenue and cuts in some federal grants. This is a multi-year process, and again, not specific to class, nor does it affect current graduate students. In response to our question asking if the university still expects professors to meet students' needs in the same way, UConn says, quote, yes, UConn continually monitors class sizes and adds new sections when it appears they're becoming too large.
The professors we spoke to tell Fox 61 they're open to sitting down at the table with UConn administration to find a better solution. They say at a time where many other states are reducing their support for public institutions, Connecticut can double down and be one of the states to stand out with their support of student education. In stores, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61. Connecticut's main education funding formula hasn't seen a major update since 2013, and because of that, superintendents, students, and advocates across the state say it no longer reflects the real cost of educating students today. The two proposals, House Bill 5002 and Senate Bill 7, aim to change that by increasing the state's per-student foundation amount and adjusting how certain school programs are funded.
Wednesday, lawmakers heard hours of testimony from superintendents.
When we say the state of Connecticut is underfunding education, it's dramatic.
Students.
I'm a senior at Bridgeport Military Academy. At the end of the day, funding is what decides everything. It decides what students have access to, it decides what they learn, and it decides how prepared they are for the future.
City leaders.
We're asking you to change the formula. We need it.
And advocates about what they say is a growing gap in education funding and two proposed bills that look at fixing it.
What these proposals, both of them try to do, is start to increase the state grant to account for cost increases over time. We know that it costs more to go to the grocery store now than it did 5 years ago, and that holds true for our local public school districts too. We know that their utility costs, their transportation costs, the buses that we see on the road, those are all costing more than they used to, and we think that the state funding should reflect those cost increases.
It's a gap that Stephen Rue, Putnam Public Schools superintendent, says is showing up right now in classrooms across the state.
550 kids, I have one math interventionist. My central office, no HR department, no communications director, no DEI director. You're looking at the guy. I have one curriculum person, and this year I had to cut my only curriculum position to half-time, and I'm presenting a 7% increase to my community. $1.6 million. It's the highest amount in the history of the town of Putnam.
House Bill 5002 and Senate Bill 7 both aim to increase the ECS formula, now capped at $11,525 per student. And Patrick Gibson with the School and State Finance Project say they go about this with two different approaches.
HB 5002, the difference on that proposal is that it takes that formula and starts to fully apply it to what I called those choice programs. On SB 7, of course, it's every single public school district in the state, but specifically those districts who do operate those choice programs, they don't get that added benefit that they would get under HB 5002. However, the SB 7 proposal has a higher inflation boost. So there's a little bit of a trade-off happening here.
Gibson tells me while the School and State Finance Project appreciate these bills, They believe they're a small step in solving a big problem. Lawmakers now have to decide whether to move these bills forward this legislative session. From the Capitol, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61. Connecticut is just one of a small number of states without an explicit framework for homeschooling oversight. I spoke with two experts to find out when and if that will change.
The issue of concern in Connecticut, and what we know for a fact, is that there are families, and they're not one-offs, that have used the pretense of homeschooling, the lack of any framework here school districts follow up, to hide their children from public view and abuse and neglect them. That is not a theory. It is not a possibility. It has happened over and over and over again.
1 year after the Waterbury captivity case reignited debate surrounding homeschool regulations. Sarah Egan with the Center for Children's Advocacy and the former child advocate for the state says the law has not changed.
Connecticut remains one of a minority of states, probably about 10 in the country, that does not have an explicit framework.
Egan points out the issue is not homeschooling itself. It's the absence of a clear system. And that lack of clarity, Egan says, can limit the Department of Children and Families.
The Child Welfare Agency, though, is only authorized to investigate a report of a reasonable suspicion that a child has been abused or neglected.
Superintendents across the state say they also want the state law to change.
Fran Rabinowitz, the head of the Superintendents Association, has long pushed for some change here to clarify the state's expectation of what school districts should do to fulfill that responsibility.
The issue is when a child is homeschooled in Connecticut, when families choose to homeschool their child, there are no set regulations.
Fran Rabinowitz says districts often lose contact entirely.
I had many students when I was superintendent in Bridgeport, especially, where they were chronically absent, and then when staff called, they said we're homeschooling, and that's the end of it. So we have no further contact with the student when the family says they're homeschooled. And so the mandated reporters, such as teachers, et cetera, don't have eyes on the student to do any type of reporting.
Rabinowitz stresses this is not an attack on homeschooling.
There are some families who are homeschooling their children who are doing an excellent job. So I'm not coming out and saying homeschooling is bad. What I'm saying is we need regulations around homeschooling.
Those regulations could include mandatory registration and check-ins with families.
The check-in once a year can be a state test, or it could be a portfolio check-in. That would be a burden on a school district that could not be integrated without additional resources.
For Egan, the core issue is clarity.
So having a clearer framework for, hey, these are the rules that districts are supposed to follow, these are the requirements for parents, right, creates much bit more clarity around role and responsibility under the law for the school district and for DCF.
Egan says Connecticut doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. Nearly every state around us, including Massachusetts and Rhode Island, has some form of homeschool framework in place. That can include required notice to districts and an annual check-in, as Rabinowitz mentioned. Other regulations, record keeping, and a proposed curriculum. In studio, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61. For some parents at St. Joseph's School, this is not about policy or funding. It's about whether their children will be safe in a medical emergency. They tell me having an on-site school nurse for just 3 hours a day is not what their children are entitled to or deserve. But district leaders tell me with a $7.5 million budget gap, they're facing their own reality, which has forced their hand when it comes to tough decisions. They say they've made attempts to help the school, but those attempts have not been accepted.
A matter of life or death. That's how some parents of students at St. Joseph's School are describing the reduction of a full-time school nurse to now just 3 hours a day.
Scary. I lose sleep at night, honestly thinking that this is the right decision for our family.
Melissa McElwee is the mother of a child with a severe nut allergy. She says she worries about what could happen during the hours a nurse is not on site, and it's up to school staff.
We have students with chronic illnesses, severe asthma, diabetes, seizure disorders. I mean, yes, they know CPR, but that's not going to help when somebody's having an anaphylactic reaction to peanuts. That's not going to help when, a first grader's going into diabetic shock.
Other parents like Timothy Londrigan say the concern also boils down to cost. He says families who choose non-public schools still contribute to the local tax base.
By choosing a non-public school in the city of New London, the city's burden of cost per student decreases.
District leaders like Elaine Maynard Adams, the chair of the New London Board of Education, tells me she understands parents' fear, but the district is facing financial realities that are ultimately out of their control.
We've made a number of efforts to try and help the situation, but I think there are things that can be done to help that situation. And unfortunately, the school has not responded to our outreach to work with them.
Maynard Adams says the reduction in nursing hours is part of a much larger financial challenge.
We've got a $7.5 million budget gap this year. It is an unfortunate byproduct of the failure of the city, the state, and the federal government to properly fund education. We had to shed a whole lot of things. The reason why this building is now dark, except for the custodians, is because among the things we eliminated were after-school activities. And we also pay for nurses at one private and one parochial school. And we reduced both of those positions from full-time to part-time.
As the questions and concerns continued, so did my attempt to get answers. I reached out multiple times over the phone and through email to St. Joseph's School Principal Marianne Coate. In an email, she responded, "Thank you for your concern. However, I am not able to speak with you at this time." So I took these concerns higher to the governing body over the school, the Diocese of Norwich, which told me my questions were better suited for Superintendent Cynthia Ritchie. She declined to comment.
I do know that our superintendent visited the principal at St. Joe's, explained to her what was going on. I can imagine that the principal was certainly not happy. I don't blame her. But yes, the superintendent did visit with the principal.
For parents, the main issue boils down to their peace of mind when their child walks into school.
It's happened before, and then we were granted a full-time nurse, but now it's come up again, and I see it as a reoccurring issue, and it shouldn't be. It really should not be. We should not be sitting here right now. It should be a priority to have a full-time nurse for all schools, public or private. This is not a luxury, and it is a legal obligation and a fundamental component of student safety.
With district leaders saying this issue ultimately comes down to funding, I raised the question of whether a full-time nurse at St. Joseph's could return in the future. Maynard Adams told me the board does not expect to have a clear picture of its full revenue until May. She says that's when decisions will be made about what programs or positions could be brought back. In studio, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61. Schools and school districts losing their eligibility for the free and reduced school lunch program, changes in staffing, class resources, and a decrease in overall school funding. Those are just a few of the key changes experts tell me public schools in the state could see due to this sharp drop in English language learners enrolled in public schools. For the first time in more than a decade, for the 2025-2026 school year, enrollment for English language learners in Connecticut public schools has dropped, and by a lot.
We have seen a reduction of approximately 2,100 students.
A reduction that Lisa Hammersley, Executive Director of the nonpartisan policy group, the School and State Finance Project, says could signal deeper problems.
It signals to me that students may actually not be attending school. They might still be here and just not going to school because they're fearful of recent immigration enforcement changes. It also signals that perhaps there are fewer students coming in, newcomer students coming into the state that are multilingual learners.
In Hartford, it's a fear community leaders are seeing firsthand. Hartford alone saw a drop of 365 English language learner students enrolled year to year.
Working with parents all across Hartford, I see safety as the top reasoning, right? And it can lead to anywhere from ICE, right? Or, their homes are not safe.
Millie Arceniegas, the executive director of Hartford Parent University, an organization that works directly with multilingual parents, says this data raises bigger questions.
Can we do better as a state? We can look for a better venue for those families so that child won't have to sit there and not learn, right? Because he's in fear of someone coming in.
A drop in enrollment and fewer families who participate in programs like free and reduced lunch could lead to impacts for entire school districts.
Community eligibility provision funding is very important for our most high-need districts. It kicks in when 25% of a student population qualifies for free and reduced price lunch. If there is hesitation of families of sharing their status with their school districts, it could result in all of the students in a district not receiving free meals, which is a huge concern and an immediate concern that I think that districts, particularly around that threshold, should be cognizant of.
Advocates tell me in this upcoming legislative session, they're going to fight for more funding and more equitable funding for schools in the state. In studio, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61. Kate Diaz, the president of the Connecticut Education Association, told me it's a naive way of thinking if you believe artificial intelligence hasn't already entered the classroom. Now the conversation moves into how it can be used by educators and school districts as a tool to help students and not stifle their learning.
We did this in my AP Lang class recently. She uploaded the rubric for an essay we were writing, and we had the AI grade our paper based on the rubric that she inserted. And it was really interesting to see what the AI had to say about it versus what we'd been hearing our whole lives from teachers.
As a junior at Enfield High School, Natalie Sampson is already seeing the benefits of artificial intelligence in her classes.
We were all really excited being able to use the technology for good because we'd been told, like, shove it down our throats, like, don't ever use it, don't ever use it. And it was cool kind of being like, oh, we can actually use this as a resource instead of like being afraid of it.
Sampson says one class that shaped how she sees AI in education is chemistry, with her teacher Nathan Van Meter.
A prompt assistant allows students to get feedback on the prompts that they write and make more specific, make better prompts that are going to be more effective when they actually put them into Arena, which acts as that interactive chatbot where they get their information and then can go and fact check it against something reputable.
We always have to remember that we don't want it to replace creativity. We don't want it to replace their own personal thinking. And that's where the danger lies, right? Like, can you write me a paper about World War II? And it can do that. But should it? And, does that developmentally help your student?
Kate Diaz, president of the Connecticut Education Association, says the focus should be on how AI supports learning without students becoming reliant on it.
I worry about supplanting some of the learning with AI. There's a learning process that's technical, that's really important in terms of skill sets for our children. So figuring out ways that we ensure those things are still happening while we are actively engaging with this technology, I think is going to be important.
Sampson says she's glad the discussion around AI in education is now happening beyond the classroom.
I think it's very exciting to learn that we will be learning how to use it the right way and that there'll be guidelines on how it can be used in the classroom.
Diaz tells me over the next few months, the conversation regarding AI in Connecticut classrooms is going to be dynamic, ongoing, and may very well set the foundation for the role AI plays in education, probably for the rest of our lifetime. In studio, Annette Montgomery, Fox 61.